shopping and entertainment district that will literally draw visitors from all across the metro area. So having this tied into transit, having more transit options, more transportation options available to reach this destination is important. And Tinker Air Force Base, although only 6 of the 74 largest employers are located within the corridor, Tinker Air Force Base is the largest single-site employer, not only within the metro area, but within the entire state of Oklahoma. And these two routes that are mentioned here, Route 15 and Route 19, that are currently operated by COPA, go directly into Midwest City. Of course, once transit riders reach downtown, there is the option of transferring to many of the other downtown routes that April mentioned in her presentation. As April explained before, we will be looking at transit dependency. So we will be looking at zero-car households. We will be looking at households with children, households with elderly, and households with below poverty income levels. And as you can see, Tinker Air Force Base stands out as a very, very large tract with high transit dependency. Now, Tinker Air Force Base is probably not the first thing that would have come to mind when you think of transit dependency, but you have to remember that a lot of the amenities that are required by on-base families are right there. Car ownership is not necessary. It's not a necessity, plus those families do have children, school-age children, so this will show up in a transit dependency score. We do have some other scattered areas with high transit dependency scores as well. As you can see, 15% of all the block groups that we've looked at in this particular corridor do have high transit dependency. Like I said before, Tinker Air Force Base shows it as one of those. It will require additional study to figure out exactly what these numbers mean for the planned transit. And of course, we also looked at land use for the Midwest City corridor. As you can see by the large presence of green and purple, the corridor is dominated by large open spaces, parks, floodplain along the river, and then of course by industrial use. And a lot of the percentage of the 19% industrial use comes from Tinker itself. Tinker would not necessarily be considered industrial use. There are industrial uses on the base itself, but it's not an industrial area like you would expect it elsewhere. However, it is something we have to take into consideration. It is not a transit-friendly land use in itself. The presence of commercial is a little lower than it was in the Edmond corridor. Presence of multifamily is also a little lower. It is more dispersed, not as dense. However, commercial areas along, we'll highlight those, along I-40 and South 29th do exist and would make a great market area. Densities are also available along Reno Avenue between Sooner and Douglas. And then, of course, the downtown area, which is highlighted as well. Just as we did for the Edmond corridor, we also looked at parallel transportation facilities for this Midwest City corridor. And there, with a wonderful Section 9 road system, we have many parallel transportation facilities available. All of those are at a minimum 4 lanes. 2 of those are principal arterials. We even have an interstate. Traffic volumes on the arterials are capable of handling additional traffic. The interstate, I remember driving this in the morning and evening rush hour, maybe not so much. However, we also have a rail corridor. Part of the rail corridor is still active as freight rail, which is, good and bad. Track conditions are wonderful in that part, but we would have to coordinate, of course, with rail freight in order to be able to operate commuter rail on the line. Half of the route itself is abandoned, and the track condition in that part is less than stellar and would require a great amount of rehabilitation. Another point I would like to make is that there are actually two approaches to downtown Oklahoma City. The southern approach via BNSF, just past the cotton mill, and then the northern approach via the abandoned Rock Island line, which just goes just north of the parking lot, which ties into the UP line, Union Pacific line, just east of Lincoln Boulevard. So there are two approaches available for this particular corridor. And to sum up some of the key points, again, we do have a slightly lower than regional growth, but we do have growth in the corridor, which is important, especially if transit stations are implemented, rail stations are implemented. We would like to draw some development to those stations. There has to be some anticipated population and employment growth available to do that. Tinker Air Force Base, Rose State College, Midwest City, Town Center, those are definite draws for this particular corridor. What might hamper us just a little bit is the large amount of open spaces and the extensive industrial uses we have within the corridor. However, on the other hand, we do have a large concentration of commercial along I-40 and South 29. Another thing that struck me as I was doing my field visit, the change dynamics of downtown Midwest City with the Midwest City Town Center. This could really be something that could be harnessed into redevelopment activity. With the implementation of the Midwest City Town Center, some of the business was drawn from previously very active commercial corridors, and so this is something that could be considered for the transit development as well. And then, of course, we do have multiple parallel transportation facilities available, one of which is also the UP-BNSF rail. Another thing we might consider as we're going into environmental constraints is the fact that we have a military clear zone and the accident potential zone, which would make siting of a rail station, for example, more delicate and difficult than it would be without such an accident potential zone in this particular area. And with that said, I would like to turn it over to Colette.
Yes. It's interesting with Midwest City, the base can be such a good thing from being able to have a large concentration of people near the base and needing to get to the base from a transit perspective. But also when it comes to a federal base, it can be difficult from the standpoint of being able to actually get people, instead of just dropping them off on the road in front of part of the base and they have to somehow get into the secure area and walk a far distance to where they're really heading. You can't really take the transit necessarily into the base. So it's an interesting challenge because there is this pool there of people and desire to get there, but then there's some challenges with that as well. So we'll be kind of digging into that a little bit more.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to go over the Norman Corridor, last but not least. It's a 17-mile northwest corridor. Here, downtown Oklahoma, just to orient you, this is the 3-mile corridor that we're talking about. Valley Brook area more, and the university area down here to the south. Again, I mentioned it's a 17-mile corridor, so it is the longest corridor of the three. It also is experiencing the greatest population increase over those 30 years and employment increase. 30% between 2005 and 2035 in population projected, and 41% in employment projection increase during that same amount of time. Going through the demographics again, just to show the breakdown of where this population and employment densities are occurring in the corridor. We'll start with population, all very much centered where we, not that, getting a little carried away, where we think they would be at both ends of the corridor. This increase of 31% again.
That's the yeah. Oh, there you go.
It's again employment increased density here in the areas that we would expect them to be. Again, in this Valley Brook area more, and around the university, population employment densities would increase by that 41%. And again, you see the right, that's where we see the more higher densities major trip generators along the corridor. In downtown Norman, we have obviously the University of Oklahoma, and downtown Norman, where we already have service, passenger service around a very growing downtown area, very pedestrian-friendly area, and the hospital in Norman. Government services and more. I also wanted to mention quite a bit of shopping that has been going on there, new shopping areas. Valley Brook area, south of downtown Oklahoma City, and I-35 kind of north of the 240 area. Out of the corridor, the Norman corridor, 9 of the major employers are located along this corridor, again, not outside of the downtown area that was mentioned before. Existing bus routes serving the corridor. Metro and CART both jointly operate bus route 24, kind of servicing both ends of the corridor, kind of commuter service already. Numerous, we said, mentioned downtown, already being serviced by several Metro Transit routes. And CART already operates 6 routes in the university routes, operating weekdays and Saturdays, already in the university area in downtown Norman. All right, transit dependency, we're going to talk about that a little bit. I think April already mentioned how we went through that and defined what transit dependency was defined as. 41% block group from the census data was average dependency for the Norman corridor. 22% with a high transit dependency as well. As you can see that in these block groups here.
That's a tricky little clicker.
Yeah, it is a little tricky clicker. Again, in the areas that we would see those growth here in the more Valley Brook and around the university, where we see that more higher transit dependency occurring. Okay, another indicator that we've been looking at is land use. It's not much different than what we saw in the Edmond corridor. The breakdown, industrial along the DNSF corridor here, industrial, single family, use quite a bit throughout, spread through the corridor. Concentration of multifamily, institutional and public land uses in Norman. Also, we see that in the Moore area as well. We also see a lot of this growth here, land use along the 240 corridor and 35, as we would expect to see right in here, and along the BNSF corridor, some of that industrial land use right through in this area. Parallel transportation facilities, just as you see in some of the other corridors, the other two, there are quite a few choices along this route. Principal arterials, 2 6-lane divided highways, Shields, and of course 35, very congested highway, and 4 others that also we were going to analyze that experience pretty relatively high volumes of traffic, but a couple of those are still considered kind of in the median range. Key points cover here, connection of 2 major activity centers, University of Oklahoma down at the southern end, and downtown Norman, both with high density areas, student population and transit dependency in that area. Higher levels of pedestrian activity, that's quite common, be expected in around the university and downtown Norman, again, that walkability that's there. High transit dependency around the university and city of Moore, those government services, that's also another area that is experiencing that dependency there. Concentration of commercial land uses around existing highways and major arterials. We saw that along the I-35 corridor and the 240 corridor. One unique thing about Norman corridor is that it already has a passenger service that Amtrak operates, 1 daily service. So we've already kind of got that passenger familiarity out there. Got a really cool depot in downtown Norman, and the existing track condition is very good because of that. It's been upgraded so that the experience along the passenger trains is very good. And there's sufficient alignment options for transit service, both for in the corridor, in the freight corridor, and also for the bus services, the things that we'll be analyzing later, those parallel transportation facilities. So we definitely have those opportunities there.
Thank
With
you.
that, yeah.
Paulette's, a lot of Paulette's experiences on the engineering side, working with freight rails and passenger rail and how those two can work together. So she's obviously been put on this corridor for a particular reason, and she'll be accessed by all the corridors as we study too, because of her great experience with both Union Pacific, BNSF, and other railroads. So just to kind of step back for a second and just think regionally, which is something that, as I mentioned at the beginning, is something important for us to do as we continue forward. One of the things that's interesting regionally is that you really do have, when it comes to your land uses, they really do tend to be right around the same percentages. So even though there's some variations, really those they're similar in that way. And as well, you've got some transit dependency differences, but for the most part, they're generally around the same amount, with Norman kind of sticking out as the most, as Paulette mentioned. From demographic standpoint, one of the things that really stands out to me is that you all have a very healthy economy here in the region, and with your projections, your employment increases really are, larger than your population increases from a percentage standpoint. That shows that, it's projected that that's going to move forward, that you have a healthy environment for employment and employers to come to the region. So that's always a plus. One of the things that a lot of times employers look at nowadays is what kind of transportation options do my employees have, and what is the employee base somewhere. So I think you guys are doing a great job of getting out in front of that question before you have even more growth occurring. So, and we've got on here both the corridor growth for the region, which is 36% employment and 27% in population, as opposed to the regional, when you really look at the regional number that you guys report on from a regional standpoint, 39% employment, 36% population. So we did want to kind of stop here, give you guys an opportunity. It's a lot of information to digest and take in. If you do have any questions, Mayor, I would just turn it over to you if there's any questions from anyone.
I'd like to hear comments on people that were surprised by something they heard. Did you see anything in this report that you wouldn't have realized otherwise, or that was not what you thought it was going to be? Okay, I think we're pretty well connected, that we know where the line is, we know what the population is. All projections on population and job growth are just projections, and our metropolitan area is changing so dynamically, it is hard to have any degree of certainty about what those numbers are going to be like, or whether the rate of growth on either area will increase or decrease going forward. So it's hard to do.
It is hard to do. I do think that it's a good problem to have. There's a lot of cities that are considered, maybe in the Rust Belt, if you will, or whatever, that their population projections, they know are going to be kind of stagnant or are going down. So that's one of the beauties of being in the area that you're in. And April, I don't know if you had something you wanted to add to that.
Actually, I also wanted to add in terms of the Federal Transit Administration and what are some of the criteria that they're looking at in rating different projects who are seeking funding from FTA. It actually works to your advantage now to have your existing information in terms of population and employment. That works, and that's increasing today, and there's FTA is looking at that with more importance now than they used to, when they rely a lot on the 20-year horizon, and that's to some extent. I'm a planner myself, so I'm not going to knock planners. There's a little bit of this element when you're 20 years out versus what's happening today or in the next 5 to 10 years. So that actually works for this areas, to this areas that I mentioned.
invite the mayors, Mayor Rosenthal, Mayor Fry, and Elizabeth, you're representing Edmond, if you'd like to speak up or talk to the specific corridor, any thoughts or revelations that you think would be great for the larger group to understand?
Well, I'll jump in. I think at a sort of high level, sort of 30,000-foot look, I mean, that is what's happening in Norman, but then you've got to kind of get down closer. I mean, there's different things happening around the OU campus, the South Research Campus, which is going to be, I think, and continue to be an economic development generator in terms of jobs. What's happening north of our city with University of North Park. And this, I guess I'm waiting for the next level of detail, which I think has got other issues involved with it in terms of connectivity and opportunities. But I think this doesn't surprise me. I mean, it seems like a very accurate snapshot. But again, I think that next level of detail is where it's going to get more interesting and challenging for our community in terms of thinking about opportunities.
I would echo what Cindy said. I think if everybody recalls W.P. Atkinson that built Midwest City, he gave Shetland ponies away every house he sold. We're going to give away electric cars parked at the stations for the future. I think it's a great idea. We're on the right track, and I just want to make sure that I can get on at the station and come down and watch Kevin Durant before he retires. Missouri.
Elizabeth, any comments?
I would agree with Cindy's comments. I think we've all done the studies and things, so we have a pretty good feeling for our demographics and our population, where we're growing. But the devil is indeed in the details, because we know where all the trouble spots are, and it might, look good when you're driving by, but, we know some of the other issues. So I would look forward to hearing what they have to say. I was sort of struck that, there seem to be so many parallels, so that tells me the corridors that we're studying are a good place to start. So, what we're trying to do.
What was the distance on the Midwest City line?
Just a little under 10.
So the distances were then 10, 14 to Edmond, and 17 to Norman. So we're talking about 41 miles if we were to do all three.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And that's, of course, just taken off of what we utilize just from a starting point for that 3 mile was looking at the freight rail corridor, that existing corridor that went through, because that tends to have the funnier shape, if you will, than a straight road. So we figured that might give us a better, if we did 3 miles off of that, it might give us a little bit better width and look at. So that's what they're based off of.
Has anyone done the math to see how many miles are in each municipality, each jurisdiction?
Have we broken that out yet? No, we haven't done that yet, but
Okay.
we could bring that back to you.
And by county too, it might be
Sure.
interesting to know. Most of that is in Oklahoma County,
Yes.
not all of it. Yeah, I think both of those would be interesting to know. And the city of Moore is in there too. Hadn't really been part of the conversation. Hadn't heard their name mentioned, but they're definitely a part of the conversation here on the presumed funding side and also on the routing. Yes.
Question.
City that it does.
I think a lot of us are aware, Salt Lake City's established their commuter rail line out to Ogden to Hill Air Force Base. I'm sure you're familiar with that to some degree. Will you be looking at how they implemented their station in comparison? Because that's one of the few that I know that goes to a major Air Force facility.
Yes.
Can we compare that?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
We thought about that, as well as we've got, URS is a huge entity, and we have actually most of the work that's done is through federal contracts, and so we actually have really good access to people who are involved with federal programs overall. So we figured we'd tap into some of that resource too, to kind of start thinking about, how can we accomplish what is necessary within those confines. But yeah, we'll look at that. You're exactly right. That's the one I think that everyone can think of. So that's a good place to at least start.
Okay. We want to move on down the agenda then to item 4.
Yes, that would be great. Okay, so both Christy and I will kind of give you a general overview of what we're going to be doing. But today, what we're looking at, we've kind of shortened your assignment, if you will, from coming up with goals and objectives to just coming up with the goals. And then, so we're trying to give you a little bit of a break. Once we've established those goals, which I'll go into a little bit more, how we're going to do that, we'll come away from this meeting and we'll identify what objectives make sense with the goals that you've identified. We'll bring those back to you as well as to the other advisory committees and get those adjusted and make sure that they meet the needs of what you all think is important for the study. So goals, we really want to think general, kind of what are we looking for the study to occur? Are we looking to, as an example, enhance economic development? Is that something that's important to this community? So that might be a goal if you feel that's something important to you. It might be to make sure that we have stakeholder and community buy-in. Like that might be something that you feel is very important. And what that can mean is people are behind it and might vote for it, or it can also mean that municipalities or others might actually help fund some of it. So you can kind of think of things in more that bigger general terms. We are also nice in the sense that we've given you guys some examples, so you can kind of, if you get really stuck on trying to come up with what you think are good goals, you can look at the examples, either just circle the ones you want or kind of work off of those. Objectives are statements that are really much more specific and measurable. So that's some of the harder work that we'll go in and come up with and then present back to you all for either agreement or editing, that sort of thing. So with that, do you want to explain a little bit how we're going to do it?
You betcha. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you guys off into groups, and each one of the corridor leads has graciously volunteered to join you. And what we're going to do is we're going to just break off into 4 groups. So Craig down to Blair, you guys will go with Andrea into the blue room, and then Ken over to Mayor Cornett. You guys will go with Paulette over into the green room, and then Mr. White down to
Steve.
You guys will actually stay in here. We're just going to move you to one side of the room. Okay? And then you guys will form our 4th group. And you guys will also stay in here. April, if you'll go with group 3. And then
And just a second
Ian, you and I
before-
will go with group 4.